Thanks so much for all of you ladies joining me. We've just had some spirited conversations in the back room about motherhood, and the title of our panel is "Does Motherhood Make a Difference?" And yes, it does. And like we just heard, 8 out of 10 women in prison are mothers. We also know that women of color are also overrepresented in the prison system. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that you all are doing to help moms reconnect with their children, and help and be an advocate for children, because like we all know, incarceration doesn't just affect the people that are inside, but also the children who are outside, and reconnecting with their parents. And I just wanted to start with a quote that Susan Sharp, who is on the next panel after this, she said something in our reporting that really took me aback, and she said that it's worse in the eyes of some prosecutors and judges to be a mother that is a drug user or a drug dealer than it is to be a murderer. And that speaks to some of the attitudes that people have towards women and mothers who choose to that use drugs, or that are selling drugs. And sometimes they're doing it, like we saw with Patricia Spotted Crow's case, to sometimes support themselves, and sometimes they're doing it because of a man in their life. And so I think the whole idea of proper womanhood is something that that we bring up in our story. And so, we'll come back to that, but I wanted to start with Sheila here. You're the Community Development Officer for Girl Scouts Beyond Bars. And so when we think about Girl Scouts, we think about selling cookies and we think about fun activities, and certainly you do that in your work with some of the girls that you work with and some of the mothers. So you work with children and their mothers who are incarcerated in the reunification process. So you go to prison with some of these children to visit with their moms, and you plan activities, and the girls do stuff with their moms, and you advocate for the girls. Can you talk about your work and talk about how you do that, how you advocate for the girls and the families, and how that happens when you go take them to prison a couple times a month?
Well, I believe that proximity is the best thing for these children. It is nothing like holding and hugging your mom. And I say to women, when they say, I have to sell drugs to feed my child, I want them to look at the faces that they left behind as a result. So when decisions are being made, it's devastating. I've transported many children, and it's always the same. There's hurt, there's fear, but they're some of the bravest children I know, because they get on a van with people they don't really know to travel miles just to see their mom. And I want people to see the children, because there are a lot of policies and advocacies for the women, which I totally support. But I want people to see the children and the programs that are needed to help these children. There is a high suicide rate among these children. These are not notes I take or books I read. These are lives I touch. They call myself and my staff with saying, I want to kill myself. Miss Sheila, Miss Shannon, Miss Jackie, Miss Josephine. And it's not one child. There's several conversations like that where they're so fearful and they're so hurt. They don't understand. They lived in that house when the drugs and whatever the criminal activity was going on. They lived that. But then their mom was just taken out of the house. She was the breadwinner. She was the support. She was the advocate for them. She was the one that encouraged them not to be like her, to go to school. And then she's removed from the home. And usually that's not with, they do not have warning of that. A child comes home and mom's gone. That's devastating. That's traumatizing. And they can't talk to anybody about it because there is a stigma. When you say, my mom is incarcerated, it's a stigma. There's secrets in the family. There's, don't tell anybody. Can you imagine how they feel? They feel alone. They feel hurt. There are youth programs for children everywhere like ours, but our program is specific for children with incarcerated parents. What that means is we believe that you have to transport that child. That's labor intensive. That's vans, that's gas, that's staff overseeing van loads and bus loads of children, because we believe it's so important that that child see and touch her mom, that they thank you. And it's so important for the mom as well, but I don't think people really realize how impactful that is to that child's life. She or he is going to school, they're trying to get on the basketball team, they're trying to get the prom dress, they're trying to figure out how they're gonna go to college, they're trying to figure out how to color in a coloring book. That's how young we have them. But yet, they are moving from house to house to house, and people are making decisions without ever considering the child. There has not been much money or funding put into programs like ours. And I'm not being specific to my program because I can only do so much. But money needs to be placed in to help these children, because it's like, the way I can best describe it to anybody, it's like having cancer and then you send me to a foot doctor, but I have cancer. That's how we do with the children. We're sending them to the Y, we're sending them to community centers when they need to be in programs that specifically help with the trauma that they're going through. Being separated for many reasons. I mean, death, you move, change jobs, divorce, but I am trying to let people understand it is so harmful to a child to be separated because your mom went to prison. And so when we transport them, I just want you to see, if I could just paint a picture, when we step off those buses and we get into that ever space that we take to see those children, to see their parents, if you could see the look on their face, they are so anxious for this woman that's gonna come through this door. And they know when they go with us, they're only gonna get about an hour and a half. But they don't care. They are so anxious to see that mother walk through. And when she comes through that door, they're running and they're hugging and they're crying. And so people have said, well, why would you do that with children? Why would prison be a place for them? But I say to them, if it was your mother and you had any place to see her, you would go see her. Mm-hmm. Because a mother is the most important individual in a young girl or child's life. She influences. So the positive of that is, when we bring them in, we do have programs that we target that. We address the issues with the mom and the children. We do it through, we do it through Girl Scout activities, resources. We do address anger. We do address trauma. But the biggest number one thing that we address is separation anxiety. Putting those two individuals together changes lives. I have brought some children with me here today, and they came, they know why they are here, and they're not ashamed, because we want them to know you didn't do anything wrong. You didn't have anything to do with the decision that was made. You are truly a victim of your circumstance, and you have a right to receive services. Just like when someone's on drugs and you say, well, they have a right to have mental health, they have a right to have treatment. Well, a child has a right to have services that address what they have gone through with the absence of their parents.
We have one of the Girl Scouts, a former Girl Scouts Beyond Bars, the graduates in the audience. Can I ask her, Paris Kennedy, can you stand up? Can everybody give her a round of applause here?
Thank you all for that. As Ms. Sheila said, I am a former Girl Scout. I am now one of the College Connect members with Girl Scouts, so basically like a mentor to the girls. Thank you. Basically, my story is during my freshman/sophomore year of high school, my mother was incarcerated. She was a single mother to 3 kids, and her leaving was probably one of the worst things that could have happened to me. Eventually, I basically dropped out of school, failed my first semester of my sophomore year in high school, started working full-time to support myself and my siblings and my grandmother, and just really didn't have a purpose and didn't have that person there to say, you have to be better and to keep pushing me. I want to say it was Miss Jackie. She came to my grandmother's house. Me and my siblings were split up, and she came to my grandmother's house, and my grandma was like, hey, come over, Say's gonna come speak to you about coming to see your mom. And I'm like, cool, that's gonna be great. So I go, and she's like, yeah, we're gonna take you every month to go see your mom. And I'm like, okay. And at this point, I was still pretty angry with my mom. I didn't know how to feel about the situation. And it was just really hard to even come to terms with seeing her, and I hadn't seen her in months. I think it was maybe even close to a year that I hadn't seen her at all. The first time I went and seen her, as Ms. Sheila said, it was overwhelming, and it was just this anxious feeling like my mom is really about to come through those, my mom is really about to come through those doors, and seeing her, just even once a month, like she said, once a month for an hour and a half changed me completely. I am now a sophomore at the University of Oklahoma. Sophomore at the University of Oklahoma, majoring in health and exercise science, pre-physical therapy. I currently am the reigning Miss Black and Gold Oklahoma. I have a platform. I wanted to give back so much, and I feel so strongly about this issue. I have a platform which is entitled Breaking Out, and it's just an initiative to educate the children about what's going on in their lives and to provide those resources, as well as to raise awareness to the fact that there aren't resources out there. I was just one of the lucky ones to make it out, and to be different than that statistic and that stigma that everybody puts on a child that has an incarcerated parent. So that's pretty much my story. From here on out, I've dedicated a lot of my time to trying to give back and trying to live through my platform. I actually have an event next week, which is a panel event similar to this one, which is just going to be focused on how, when a parent is incarcerated, it affects not only the parent or the child, but also the community, and what needs to be done to address those situations. But that's my story, and these girls, they probably have their own story, probably battling with their own issues, but this is a very traumatizing experience, and I just feel like everybody else probably that's in this room, that there needs to be awareness to the issue, and from here on out, that's basically what I'm going to do.
Demari, I think that leads really nicely into talking with you about the advocacy work that you're doing. And you're a mom, and you're working on legislation to prevent shackling of pregnant women when they deliver their child. You came into prison, you were 7.5 months pregnant.
Yes, I was indicted when I was 7.5 months pregnant. And so I was able to deliver my baby at home, and I went into prison when he was 6 months old.
Okay.
However, I lived in Texas at the moment. And when I had to turn myself in, I was sent to Tallahassee, Florida. So imagine the hardship of, leaving a 6-month-old baby and going all the way from Texas to Florida and not knowing when I'll be able to see my child again. And then I saw him when he was 9 months old. And so, and I could really, when sitting here and listening to Ms. Sheila tell the story about how you're anxious, or how that child is anxious, you're anxious on both sides, because just waiting for a visit from your child, that gives you hope and purpose. But being so far from home, you don't know when to expect it. And so I saw him when he was 9 months old, and I didn't see him again until he was 2 years old. And there was no, so there was no consideration of the fact that I had a child, and my sentence was a mandatory minimum sentence. So therefore, it was a conspiracy charge, and it carried 10 years, 120 months. And there was no consideration of the fact that I was pregnant. It's just like, if I committed a crime, which in a conspiracy, you're held responsible for everybody else's actions also. So it's not that my crime warranted that much time. That was my first time having a felony. And so I was sent that far away from home, and I really didn't know when to expect to see him.
I think, and then you had another, and when you came home, you had missed so much. You had missed like the first steps, you had missed.
There was so many, so many first things. I missed the first two, the first word, he was 6 months old when I left him, and when I got him back in my custody, he was 8 years old. So this is a person that I've got to get to know. It's not my child that I know his little quirks and what he likes and what he dislikes, and we had to get to know each other. And it's a process. It's an ongoing process.
Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of mothers struggle with, that they have a grandparent or somebody else that's raising their child while they're in prison, and they may have a way that they want to discipline or raise their child, but somebody else is doing it for them. I wonder if that's something.
Yes, that's the story of many mothers, because you can't be a mother behind bars. You know, you could tell somebody, well, I want you to do X, Y, and Z, but they're in their household, so you can only be grateful that your child is in a safe place.
Yes.
And you know, they may not do everything exactly how you want it, but they're being loved and they're being fed and they're being clothed, because some children fall into the cracks and they're bounced from place to place. So that's a big thing.
Can you talk about the legislation that you're advocating for?
Yes, the legislation that I'm advocating for is to end the shackling of pregnant mothers. So when a mother goes into delivery, it's not necessary for her to be shackled, not a leg, not an arm, nothing is necessary, because we take this risk to bring children into the world. And at any moment, it could be a life or death situation. And so your main concern is just bringing that child into the world. So therefore, I feel like it's dehumanizing to shackle a woman during childbirth, regardless of if it has committed a crime.
Okay, so let's talk with you, Patrice, about you work with Still She Rises.
Right.
Tell me, this is you're different from other public defenders, when you only defend moms that are incarcerated.
Right.
Tell me why you came from New York City to North Tulsa, and a little bit about that community and what makes that community unique in Oklahoma, and I think with some of the clientele that you represent.
So Still She Rises came to Oklahoma because of the high incarceration rate of women. We specifically chose North Tulsa because, as you've heard today, Black women and women of color are disproportionately reflected in those statistics. And so that's why we chose North Tulsa. North Tulsa is the historically Black community in Tulsa. It is a very resilient community, a very welcoming community, but it's also a community that has a very sad and scary and terrible history with the race massacre from 1921, and it has suffered from systemic injustice and government deinvestment since that 1921 massacre. And I think what's really important about that is that history and the silencing of talking about that history really is embedded and entrenched in the culture of not only Tulsa, but in North Tulsa. And so when we look at what's happened in North Tulsa, how there's no grocery store in North Tulsa, but over $15 stores, where there are 23 elementary schools in North Tulsa, with the majority having F ratings. So when we look at sort of what's happening to North Tulsa, you have to look at the history also.
Yeah, I think I'm supposed to be using this microphone now. Sorry. I want to talk about you come and see your clients within the first 48 hours that they're charged, and that's really different from a lot of the women that I spoke with for the story. They would have a public defender that they would meet with maybe a week later. They would, just like with Patricia Spotted Crow, they would find out like, oh, I'm being charged with this. It makes, I think in your experience, it makes a huge difference when you come in right away and you're able to work with the women.
Absolutely.
Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. So right now what we are seeing, and I should preface that we have been on the ground since January, so we are learning a lot, and we don't know everything right now. But what we are seeing is that the arrest to arraignment time right now in Tulsa is about a week, okay? So that's a week of a person sitting in jail without having seen a lawyer, without having seen a judge, and they're held in on bail that is set by a bail schedule, right? And you think about bail, the purpose of bail is to make sure that someone comes back to court, but it's also supposed to be individualized based on that person's circumstances. People are sitting in jail for a week without having anyone challenge bail. So one of the first things that we have done at Still She Rises is that we go to see our clients within actually 24 to 48 hours of arrest. And we are filing motions to get in front of judges almost immediately to talk about bail. All of our clients are indigent. They have little to no income, but are sitting in jail on $25,000, $50,000 bonds. Believe me, it does not take that much money to ensure that my client who has zero income is going to come back to court. So we go up into court and we advocate for bail. We have had tremendous success with that. We've had probably close to 70% of our bond reduction motions granted. And it's tremendous because during that week, all of our clients are mothers. They don't know where their children are sometimes. They don't know who has their children. Their children's routine has been disrupted. The mothers, if they're working, they may have lost their job during that week time, and we can advocate with employers to say we're working to get them out. We think that we can get them out, and we just are trying to stabilize our mothers after this destabilizing event has happened.
Yeah, and I also want to talk to you about how sometimes, parental rights are there's a move to immediately terminate parental rights in some cases, and you are challenging that as well.
Right. So Still She Rises does what's called holistic defense. So we don't only focus on the criminal case. We also focus on some of the collateral things that happen with our clients and our mothers in this case. So not only are we in criminal court, we are also in the family courts and juvenile courts and represent mothers to keep their rights from being terminated and really try to get the children and mothers back together. It was very interesting to hear Steve Kunstweiler talk about there needing to be more deprived cases being filed when we know that children need to be with their mothers. But we certainly have plenty of concurrent cases where there's both criminal charges and cases in the child welfare system for the same allegations. And it's pretty scary what is happening right now. It's something that we are not used to seeing in New York City. It wasn't very often that we saw concurrent cases, but we see mothers being charged and also at risk of losing their children. So we currently have clients that are sitting in jail for child neglect for things like they didn't have food or furniture in their house. They're sitting in jail for being poor. We have criminalized poverty. And then instead of supporting these mothers and giving them help, we're sitting them in jail. Sorry, I keep going.
No, I think that's exactly, we were gonna talk about a case, and there was a case where a woman was, she
was homeless for about a year, was able to get housing through the Housing Authority, happened to have her children, had been there less than a month, and the police came to the house for a separate altercation. They come in, they don't see furniture, they don't believe there's adequate food. She's arrested, charged with child neglect. And the judge asked me, so what does your client look like? I'm like, Judge, what's more important is what did those children look like? Were those children not being fed? Did they look malnourished? Of course not. They didn't. That child was being fed, but now my client is sitting in jail. She was originally in jail on $100,000. We got it reduced to $50,000. She's now in on $10,000, but she has no money. So she is sitting in jail for being poor.
We have less than 40 seconds left, and I want to give, Demaria, I just want to ask you, as a mom, hearing from children and hearing from, the people up here on stage, as a mom, I'd like to have you have the last word. And what do you think? What do you think? What are some of the takeaways that you've heard of from this panel discussion, and what are some recommendations? Like I said earlier to Patricia Spotted Crow, we have a room full of district attorneys and people who are in power. And I want to hear from you on what you
I think that it's very important that the leaders of our state recognize that even with drug abuse, that should be more so of a public health concern instead of criminalizing it. And I believe that we as mothers, we need more support groups. I've been in conversation with Still She Rises, and we're in the process of forming support groups. And also, we need more alternatives to prison. Different programs that focus on a holistic approach. And as I sit here as a member of the National Council of Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls. So the end of shackling of pregnant women is a nationwide effort. It's not just Oklahoma. Oklahoma isn't the only state. It's just challenging the systems that, all across that just abuse the women. And I think just looking at the fact of women and children more so as individuals and not as numbers. Not a number in the justice system, not a number that makes the prison money. And that's the main thing, is looking at us as individuals, because a nation is judged by how they treat their women.
Thank you, ladies, so much for the work that you're doing and for being here today. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.